I call to order the special meeting of the Planning Commission for Wednesday, November 14, 2018. May we have the roll call, please?
Chair Stadler.
Here.
Vice Chair Yarbrough.
Here.
Commissioner Dacia Still de Monterouge. Commissioner King.
Present.
Commissioner Meza. Commissioner Amarad.
Here.
Commissioner Young.
Here.
We haven't heard whether Commissioners Duchatel, Montague, and Mesa are going to be with us tonight. I'm thinking we can wait a few minutes to excuse them. We don't have to excuse them right at the beginning of the meeting, do we? We can do that after council liaison report if they haven't shown up before we get into our actual business and discussion items. Will you please all rise and join me in the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Next item is the approval of the agenda and content in order. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda from any commissioner? Seeing none, our agenda is set. Next item is public comments. Has anybody signed up for public comment? Nope. Anybody in the audience like to make public comment at this time? There will be 2 public hearings, and if you're talking on either of those items, you can sign up for that and to talk at that in time. All right. Council liaison reports.
Thank you. This is weird.
Yeah, isn't it?
I wanted to tell you that last night we passed the second reading of that could be somebody, measure to combine the Parks Commission with the Tree Board. The Tree Board used to be associated with the Planning Commission. And it's, as you probably know, going to be called something different, the Open Spaces Commission, I think. And that all went well, and we did decide, there was a concern about the tree regs being sort of land use, having a land use component that we wanted to make sure that followed the traditional anyway pathway through the Planning Commission, and it didn't seem to in the measure itself. There was nothing describing that. So we had a long conversation and eventually realized that all land use decisions, no matter who recommends them to City Council, have to go to the Planning Commission first. So that satisfied a lot of our concerns about that, and we did pass it.
Question.
Yes.
Was there any discussion about having an arborist on the tree board or on the combined Parks and Tree Board?
Yeah, there will be 4 members, non-voting members, who can be non-citizens, and it would presume that those seats would go to experts in the field or people who are extremely interested who don't live here, an arborist being one of those possibilities. And of course, the previous arborist is a citizen, Tom Quigley. I don't know if he's still, I don't know when the tree board met. Oh, Mr. Meza would know.
Yeah, he's not there.
He's not a resident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the combined number of members of the?
I think it's 9, including the non-voters. Am I correct?
Well, there'll be 5 that will be appointed by the council, and those will be voting members. And then of those 5, they then will be able to appoint up to 4 non-voting members. So a total of 9 potentially, but there's only going to be 5 voting members.
Thank you.
I have an odd question. Does that mean we no longer are Tree City USA
Nope.
because we don't have a specific tree board?
No, that was research. Kelly Mazzoli researched that, and we still have every right to be a tree board, and we intend to be. That's good. Okay, another thing is that we also passed a legislative agenda, which is a list of points that we agree we're going to talk to our legislators about in this coming legislative session that we want for our city. One of them that has strictly to do with your work is, and is an ask of our legislators regarding growth management changes, conceivable changes to the Growth Management Act. We want to make sure that cities retain the right to do their own local zoning, so it doesn't move up to the state to do, which, you know, it hasn't, there's been a tendency towards that, and it's one of the, at least I think, one of the great things about the Growth Management Act is that it laid those, that planning responsibility, gave it to them. It's a good thing we have that duty to the cities themselves. It doesn't come from above. So I won't go this year, but 3 or 4 council members go to Olympia in January to go to our legislators' offices and talk to them about our agenda, and so that will be one of the things they'll be talking about that particularly has to do with your work. So, is there anything any question I can answer, or?
How's the budget coming along?
Swimmingly.
Good.
Yeah, no problem.
With respect to the zoning question, was there interest or movement on the part of the state to take over zoning for all the cities and communities?
Well, that would probably be saying too much, and I don't follow it 100%, but I know there was a bill last year that didn't pass that would have required cities to change their zoning to not have any lower zoning than R6 or 8 or something, which, you know, would certainly affect us and many other cities as well.
Oh,
So it didn't make it.
I can add a little bit more to that.
Excellent, go ahead.
Yeah, so it went through last year and it failed, but there's another attempt this year with a little bit different of a twist with the affordable housing component of it. But basically what it is, it's been an effort to, around transit centers, and that's kind of been where some of the, you know, the rubber meets the road thing, because originally when you first looked at it, it was such a broad definition, it could almost have included any bus stop. This last round, they kind of made it a little bit more clear, and they set they wanted to set different standards based on being a train station versus bus with like rapid transit, but what they wanted to require was anybody that had one of these facilities, I think it's within a mile, was going to have to upgrade their zoning, their density to certain standards. And we started doing a little bit of look at that, and it would have a pretty big impact on us. We're not the only ones, other jurisdictions as well, and that's one of the reasons it didn't get through last time, but again, another effort's being made this year. So we just have to really pay attention to it and make sure our voices are heard on it, because it's essentially, it would become a top-down. They wouldn't necessarily tell us what all our zoning is, but they would establish our minimum density requirements, which, you know, that's a big part of what our zoning standards do. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Anything else?
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Councilmember Waters. So before we move into business and discussion items, can we have a motion to excuse Commissioner Duchatel Montegru?
I so move.
I'll second.
Motion and a second to excuse Commissioner Duchatel Montegru. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, he's excused. All right, so we'll move into business items. Our first business item is draft planning commission minutes for October 17, 2018, that are in your packet. Are there any changes or corrections that need to be made to the minute? Seeing none, can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move the minutes for October 17th, 2018 be approved as submitted.
Is there a second on that
I
motion?
second, so long as it's 2018.
We have a motion by Commissioner Yarbrough, seconded by Commissioner Young, to approve the Planning Commission regular meeting minutes of October 17, 2018. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Great, thank you very much. All right, then we will move on to our first public hearing of the evening.
Oh, it's back
And that is receive public testimony on code amendments to the residential development regulations and the tourist business zone. Can we have a motion to open the public hearing and accept public testimony?
I move. Go ahead.
Just clearly state the motion. You need to state the motion rather than just so moved. So if you can, go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead, Steve, you're ready to read it.
I move to open the public hearing and accept public testimony on the question about residential development in the tourist business zone.
Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Commissioner Yarbrough, seconded by Commissioner Amaran, to open the public hearing on code amendments to the tourist business district. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? All right. Public hearing is open. First, we have a staff report, I assume?
We do, and a lot of this actually is going to be kind of just going over what you've had presented before, but I just kind of wanted to make sure we just kind of have everybody kind of caught up on some of the discussions that we've had in the past. I also did include in your packet some of the past memos and stuff that summarize a lot of our discussions. The handouts you have up there, what's behind you up on the screen, you also have in these handouts because we're not quite sure how the technology is going to work tonight. So in fact, we've got to kind of go back to no mouse situation here. So hopefully this will work pretty well for us. But we also made these handouts for you just in case we have any technology failures tonight, and we can then work off of these things. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. And if you have questions while you go through this, again, I'm just going to kind of summarize things that we've talked about in the past, but if you have any questions in the course of what I'm presenting here, just feel free to ask your questions and stuff. So again, we always start with the question, what are we doing? And so what are we doing is basically we have a proposal here to be amending our codes to amend sections the Woodinville Municipal Code 21.21030 to revise the conditions under which residential development is allowed in the tourist business zoning district. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in another slide here in a moment. And then the other thing we're looking to do also is we're going to look to amend another section of our code, WMC 21.22.030, which is to increase residential densities. Currently it's 12, and the proposal is to increase it to 24 dwelling units per acre. And then also we would be looking to establish a maximum 25% building coverage standard for residential development in the tourist business zoning district. It worked well. So why are we doing this? Again, we've talked about this in the past. This all started originally with the Woodinville Wine Village folks had submitted a request, a citizen-initiated code amendment requesting to have residential development be allowed on the ground level, because currently in the tourist business zone we do not allow for that. And then they also wanted us to be able to allow for some higher density of residential units. In the course of reviewing some of, as they were bringing in some of their applications for projects, there were some questions that came up regarding some of the development standards. And so one of the other things that then got added into this is that staff decided that we need to seek some clarity on whether to apply a building coverage standard or whether to do a floor area to lot area ratio standard for both limitations. And in the course of the discussions, you may recall the Planning Commission settled on basically they wanted to do the building coverage standard. And so that's what you'll see in the proposal here. So this is just kind of a reminder about where the tourist business zone, this is the boundaries of it. It's down here on the south part of the city. It's 32.59 acres. It only composes of about 1% of the city's land area. So it's not a large area, but it's a very important area in terms of what we want to do in terms of tourism and the wine industry. So the first thing we're going to look at is revising condition 20. And I think in your packet, it has the strike through and the Planning Commission's recommendation. You can see what the old language is. This is just kind of summarizing what the new language is. Not all of this is new. For example, the first bullet statement about a development agreement being obtained pursuant to Chapter 2182. That's actually one of the current requirements we have for residential development in the tourist business zone. You may recall, we've talked about this in the past, residential is not an outright permitted use. It's only allowed through a development agreement. So somebody just can't come in with an application. They actually got to go through this process. Both Planning Commission, because you'll look through the development agreement, and then the council has to approve that and allowing for the residential before it becomes an allowed use within the tourist business zoning district. and the next bold statement I have up here, this again is also something currently, we just kind of reworked the wording to make it a little bit clearer, but it's the residential development being consistent with the vision and goals of the Tourist District Master Plan. This was a document that I think we presented to you maybe back in August, I think it was included. And basically it outlined a bunch of design standards, and there was a bunch of goals and objectives that were actually outlined on what we were looking for. Interestingly, most of it doesn't really pertain to residential. It's really more about the mixed-use design of the area. And I think some of that had to do with, because at that time, there was a period where we actually did not allow residential in this area. And then it was added back, not recalling off the top of my head, but it's in one of the staff reports there, that it did get added back in as something being allowed. But when they did the master plan, they didn't really account very much for residential in it. This next bullet statement up here, no direct dwelling units, entrances, or exits are permitted on 148th, 145th, and the Woodinville-Redmond Road. That again, that's something that's in our current code. In terms of the access for when dwellings are on the upper floor, they're not allowed to have their exit or entrance ways facing on these, and so we actually, using that kind of as a base, we also look to do the same thing with dwellings, because we'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment about the allowances for ground floor residential. And then another thing up here was, which this is new, this requirement for public benefits. Now you may recall, talked about this in the last meeting, we've always had an ability to require public benefits as part of a development agreement. But what's changed with this is where before it was optional, this actually makes it a mandatory requirement in order to be able to get residential development. So now I want to talk a little bit about the ground floor. This is probably one of the biggest changes that's being proposed in this part of the section, in addition to the density. So it was what we kind of outlined were some protection here. So the only way that you have it on the ground floor is it has to be authorized in the development agreement. And then no dwelling unit is located on the side of the building facing within 300 feet. Now, the code talks about being adjacent to these streets, 148th, 145th, and Woodinville-Redmond, but our definition of adjacent has this 300-foot standard. So that's where the 300-foot comes from. And then the other part in here, to try to help protect some of the residential as a secondary use in the zoning, we look to allow for a footprint of residential development on the ground floor, not allowing it unlimited down there, but basically limiting it to 50% of the non-residential development that's on the ground floor. What that basically calculates out to is that you're allowing about a 1-to-3 ratio. So for like every square foot of residential, you would have 2 square feet of non-residential that would be allowed with that.
In that non-residential, can parking be included as part of that?
Can park be included?
Parking.
Parking? No, parking actually is actually not included in those calculations for residential. We actually would exclude it.
Thank you.
All right. So one of the things we talked about pretty extensively at the last meeting was this consistency with the comp plan, and the big piece here being about residential being a secondary use in the tourist business designation. You may recall that our comp plan does not actually have a maximum density standard for the tourist business, so you had a lot of flexibility in establishing what you wanted to recommend for the density standards. But this residential as a secondary was a pretty important thing that we took a look at. And you may recall when we talked about this that when we look at residential, you can look at it many different ways. You can look at it as a ratio. You could also look at it in terms of design. So this is where we talk about how much residential you might allow on the ground floor versus what might have to be on the upper levels. And then the other part here is that we think about mixed use in terms of it being, often we think about it in vertical, but it can also be thought about as horizontal. And so once we talked about this before, when we went looking through all of this, we did, my suggestion to you, our conclusion that staff reached on it is the current proposal as you have presented right now is consistent with the comp plan, including residential as a secondary use. I know there were some concerns about that, and we talked about this a bit at the last meeting, and I do believe this proposal is consistent with that. Now, as a final thing I want to bring, I don't know if all of you saw the email Yvonne emailed to you earlier today. The Wine Village folks had submitted an email to me late this morning about some suggested changes that they would like to see to the language. And I haven't really had a chance to really dive into it. I kind of just took a quick look at it. And rather than just recommending dismissing it outright or really even trying to dive into what it might mean and everything, one of the things I would recommend, if you do want to look into this a little bit more, because there may be some good nuggets out of that, but again, since I haven't been able to evaluate it, I can't really give you a certainty one way or the other. I would recommend going ahead and holding your deliberations, hold your hearing, hold your deliberations and stuff, but you may not want to necessarily vote on it tonight, and give us a chance to look at these suggestions, and then we can follow up with you at the December meeting, at which time you could take your final action on that. And if there's any additional, maybe we may want to incorporate some of these changes, or at the very least, we can maybe at least have a fuller understanding how those might affect. I know they commented to me that they thought these were all minor. I'm not necessarily sure that's the case, and that's one of the reasons if you do want to look at these things, and I don't think there's any harm in doing that, it would be helpful to have a chance to actually take a look and further analyze it and see what those things might be. So that pretty much concludes my presentation to you, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Okay, before we get to questions, can we just, I want to let the record state that Commissioner Duchatel Montague has joined us, and he is no longer excused.
I was driving to the wrong location.
You are not alone.
Any questions for staff before we take public comment? Okay, so now we go into the public comment portion of our public hearing. Has anybody signed up? Nobody has signed up? Oh, looks like somebody wants to. So you don't have to sign up. You just come forward, state your name and address, and you will have 3 minutes to make comments. When there's 1 minute left, I'll give you a 1 minute, and then I'll put my hand up to stop when the time has expired at 3 minutes.
Okay.
So before we get, you had a presentation you wanted to put up on the screen?
Well, I really defer to the chair and the commission as to whether or not you would like to see.
You know, we've done that in the study sessions. To be fair, we don't let other members of the public bring in presentations during the public hearing portion.
Okay. My goal is to walk you through the proposed changes that we're proposing. So it's your...
How long will that take?
It's really up to you. I can go quickly, or if you're not interested in hearing that tonight, I'd like to focus on one other issue. So
Does it help if we do a motion to open up a, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes
Well,
discussion?
we wouldn't have to necessarily make a motion to it. I guess I would recommend we go along with Mr. Grumbach's recommendation to continue the public hearing, and at that time, they can bring back that information of the proposal in the staff report.
Chair Statler,
Yeah.
may I make a suggestion? Staff would like to have a chance to go through the suggestions they've made in some detail. Would it be possible for you all to talk together, and so that next time when we're making a decision and continuing the public hearing, that we might get a fuller explanation that way?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we apologize for the tardiness of our comments. We had some logistical issues, so it's not a habit that we're in. I'm giving things at the last minute, so I do apologize for that. But if you'd like me to walk you through them, I'm happy to do that. I can, if it's your pleasure, I can certainly send the PowerPoint presentation that walks through all the changes, recommended changes that we have in detail. In a couple different formats.
I think that would be best. You know, I don't want to start setting a precedent for other public hearings of allowing applicants to introduce things in this forum. So if you can provide the information to staff, and then they can bring it back, and any comments you have at the continued public hearing, we'd welcome. But please take 3 minutes now to share your comments.
Sir, can I ask a question for future reference for our continued public hearing?
Yeah.
So what exactly do we get to comment on?
Whatever you want to comment on.
It's just a little unusual in my experience to not be able to propose different language in the context of a public hearing.
Well, you can do that if you can do it within the 3 minutes.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
asking what the
Yep.
scope of
No.
what the anticipated
Yeah.
presentation would be
So-
during the next meeting. So I just want to be clear from
Yeah,
this.
no, and you can comment anything you want to introduce during the public hearing,
Okay.
as long as it's germane to
Okay.
the amendment and that,
Thank you
you're
very
welcome
much.
to do.
So,
And before you get started, can we clarify, is it 5 minutes or 3 minutes?
Is it
It's for public hearings.
Is it 5? Okay,
5.
I'm sorry. So you have 5 minutes.
2 minutes. Thank you.
But again, I'll give you the 1-minute sign and then
You're not
a
gonna
stop
need the
sign,
1-minute
okay?
sign, I promise you that.
All right, great.
I've taken enough of your time. So my sole comment this evening is that this 300-foot adjacent requirement, that's not in the draft ordinance. And so I understand the genesis is based upon adjacent, but quite frankly, we have no idea how that would be applied, particularly since 300 feet is a fairly substantial dimensional standard. And those are all the perimeter streets. And so we're very unclear as to how that would be applied, whether that would be applied to any building, the entire ground floor of any building within 300 feet of those designated streets, whether it would essentially be a radius and no residential uses could lie within the radius from those streets. But it came as quite a surprise to us that that is something that's being proposed this evening, because that's not in the draft language. And if it was, that would have been another thing that we commented on in terms of revised language. So I just wanted to address that, and that'll be something that we can certainly speak to your staff about to figure out how that would be applied and give you information about that next time.
Please do. And just, we got kind of sidetracked. For the record, state your name and address.
My name is Tim McCarg. I'm a land use planner with Van Ness Feldman. My address is 719 2nd Avenue, Suite 1150, Seattle, Washington, 98102.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jim Tosti, 245 Lake Avenue West, Washington. Just to piggyback on what Tim just said, the language that was delivered to us in the draft amendments did not include any notification provision for a 300-foot adjacent setback. This has just magically appeared tonight. If that were to be incorporated, I can tell you that every single building that we were planning on reducing to 3 stories would get wiped out. There would be no point of this whole discussion if that were to be part of, because these buildings are within 300 feet of these roads that we're being restricted from. So this is kind of, it's a head scratcher for us. We're not sure where this came from. So, and we'll discuss, you can go through the package and read the rest of what we think are minor suggested changes, which are for clarity on the items that were presented in your package. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? No? All right, so we'll close the public testimony portion of the public hearing. Do you have any comment, Robert, on the 300?
No, it was actually, we talked about it at the last meeting. And as I mentioned before, it's the word adjacent is defined in our zoning code, and that's where that 300 feet comes from. And we actually brought this up, I believe, at the last meeting as well. So it's not a new thing. We talked to you guys a little bit about it before. And again, I can take a look, we can talk a little bit more about his concerns. I'm not quite sure they're reading it correctly, but that gets into maybe whether we might want to make some tweaks to try to clarify some things in the regulations and stuff too, so.
I have a question about that adjacent. Is that, on its versus you are, I wasn't aware of that. Do we use, is it adjacent throughout the municipal code, or is it just for that zone? And is it defined, like, because it seems to be surprising that it is 300, like I see many buildings within 300 feet of roads, right?
Yeah, it's a definition in our zoning regulations, and that's actually how they define, in our zoning regulation, it defines adjacent.
But is it just for this zone or for all?
No, it's a definition that applies across the zoning.
Okay, and it is
wherever we would see that word used.
Like this restriction, of course, for 148 and 155th adjacent is specific to that zone, because I mean, there's not 148 in all the zones. Are there other examples where how we apply the 300 feet? Similarly?
Off the top, because I wasn't digging into the rest of this stuff, we can look in those things, and again, if you want to have some examples at the next meeting, we can talk a little bit more about it.
And last question, is he technically right, like it doesn't say 300 feet, it says adjacent, and you're deducing that adjacent is defined as 300 feet, and
the term adjacent is a defined term in our zoning regulations, and so that is where it comes from.
But in the proposed tax we don't say 300 feet, we say adjacent, and then because it refers to.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, that helps. Fine.
Commissioner Almaraz.
The purpose of this is to make sure that there's no ground floor residential within 300 feet. That's the
Right, and,
idea of it, so that anything that has ground floor residential would be back in on the property, away from the roads.
right, and basically what it is what we're actually talking about is no ground floor dwelling unit is located on the side of any building facing where such buildings are adjacent to. So what we're basically looking at is 300 feet back from the roads. It's not saying no residential, it's the part of any buildings facing towards that you would not have residential on that facing part. It doesn't mean they couldn't have residential on the opposite side of it. It just means it's on the facing side towards those roads of any buildings that would be within that 300 feet.
What is the rationale for that?
Well, the street thing came from the existing code where we limited, and so we were trying to figure out how, since there was a concern about limiting residential, and I'm going off of the tourist business zones presumption that they don't want residential facing on those roads because of the existing language, and so I was just building upon what the tourist business zone currently has on restrictions as far as residential along those streets. So
Okay.
that's where it came from.
Commissioner Abbott.
With respect to that, does that mean that there's no residential on any floor that is within 300 feet, say 299 feet of 148th Avenue?
Just the ground floor.
Just the ground floor?
Right.
Okay.
And like I said, so we can take a look at, obviously, I think they've got a different reading of it, and so like I said, that's one of the things we'll look through, and then we can take a look, and maybe if we need to make some adjustments to it, we can.
Commissioner King, any questions down there?
No, not right now.
Commissioner Mason?
No.
No? I think you wanted, so Stephanie, did you have anything?
Oh, I talked out of turn already, thank you.
I just want to make sure everybody had a
Yeah,
chance before we went
Thank
back
you.
to you.
Just to understand the adjacent, the facing, does that mean if there's an apartment or a residential, but it's a sidewall, that sidewall could be on the 300 feet, but not the facing entry? Like, what does it facing mean? I'm sorry to be very technical, but.
No, it's fine. I mean, basically, facing is going to be what would be visible. But if you're talking about the sidewall, no, so if the sidewall, and without having a diagram or anything like this.
But I mean, if you have an apartment and there's a front, there's windows on the side, is like the front porch facing, is that what you mean, but the sidewall, that's not facing?
Yeah, it's the side of the building that's facing towards the road. That's what it's
Okay,
talking
so.
about.
It's not just the front.
Four walls are facing, right? It's not
No,
just.
four walls would not be facing that road, because you'd have, one wall would be on the opposite side of the building. So that wall on the opposite side of the building would not be facing the road.
What I'm saying is that,
Do you need a picture on the whiteboard?
no,
We have one.
I know.
It's
The-
ginormous.
a building, let's assume for simplicity, has four walls. You can turn that building any way, shape, or form. There's always a wall facing the street. Is that?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I didn't know if facing meant only the front porch is the facing
The
wall.
front, the entrance.
The entrance.
The entrance to.
Yes, thank you.
Which I kind of had always understood it to be that the entrance couldn't face it, but
You're saying, no, it's any wall cannot be
Right.
towards. So basically, you take the road, you take 200 feet, sorry, there cannot be any wall that's residential on that 300 yards.
Yeah, because keep in mind, there's another provision here that doesn't allow any entrance or exits on the side of the buildings that face
Faces
towards that
the
road
street.
as well.
Okay.
So there would not be any residential or any
Okay.
entryways for residential. Now, entryways obviously for commercial, fine, but for residential would not be.
Okay, so we should clarify that.
My point of clarification, that does not apply to second, third, fourth, fifth floors?
Correct, this is the ground floor.
Just the ground floor.
Right. So you could still have on the upper levels, you could have residential facing towards those streets, it'd be perfectly fine.
okay.
Quick question.
Yep.
What about work-life apartments like they have in Redmond where it's actually zoned for workspace on bottom and residential top as the same entrance for one single housing unit?
So our code currently does not define the work living spaces. So how we end up treating those is basically you have to break the building down into its components. That unit has to be broken into its unit, the residential unit and the commercial unit. So if you're on one of these streets, you would have to have the commercial up on the front and the residential behind it.
So you couldn't have one entrance into both?
No, you'd have the one entrance, but because the commercial is facing on the road, or I mean, would be facing outward, it would just be considered a
So
commercial.
at that point, you could have an entrance for residential facing those streets, but have
So
zoned as commercial use.
technically, we would consider it the entrance to the commercial, and then within the commercial, you have an entrance that's inside the building that
Correct.
goes into the residential. That's how we would look at it.
Okay.
So the residential would not be actually on the outside of the building, it would be on the inside of the
Inside,
building.
but it's the same unit that the,
Commissioner Mason?
From the testimonial, they seem to imply that 300 feet includes the entire tourist district. Is that accurate? The picture I have doesn't have dimensions, so how far in is, yeah.
How much is 300 feet?
Yeah, how much is 300 feet in this
300 feet,
picture?
but only those
Maybe on
facing those roads.
on the drawing, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't actually measured it out and stuff, because,
Well, I
and again,
assume it's not the whole thing, right?
I haven't actually measured it out.
Measured it.
I suspect not, but again, I haven't actually measured it out, so.
So,
But we can do that, we can dig into that a little
Bring
bit
that
more
back.
and just
We can do a
verify,
public
yeah.
hearing. It'll illustrate what we're talking about.
Yep.
And then hopefully through meeting with the applicant, too, you guys can come to some sort of understanding on that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea is that we want as much clarity as we can get, but we also want to make sure that in doing that clarity, we're not losing what we're trying to accomplish as well.
I know this might be silly to ask, but is there any possible way that the word adjacent was used improperly at some point in time?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to answer that because, I mean.
Staff changes, and just want to clarify that there wasn't an accidentally unknowing adjacent has a definition of when used in language like this.
Well, I mean, it was adopted in the code, so I wouldn't use the word accidental because it was adopted in the code, so
Right.
that's not accidental. I mean, that would have been done purposely.
If we want to change that, we'd have to change the wording there to say something different.
Yeah, but we wouldn't want to, because that's getting outside of the scope, we wouldn't look to redefine adjacent. Instead, if there's a concern about that, we would look to actually look at, instead of using the word adjacent, we would set an actual,
That's what I meant. We would
but
not
it
use
would come up within the
adjacent,
tourist
we would use
business, right?
100 feet, 50 feet, whatever.
Right, exactly.
Changed, okay.
Yeah,
Any other questions?
No.
No?
I move the public hearing be continued on to the next possible meeting.
Second? Was that a
Yeah,
second?
sure, yeah.
Okay. We have a motion from Commissioner Yarbrough and a second from Commissioner Duchatel Montecru to continue the public hearing to our next scheduled Planning Commission meeting, which is currently scheduled for December 5th.
Yes.
Any further discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, public hearing is continued to December 5th, and you'll have a lot of good stuff to bring back to us, I'm sure.
Are you planning, just so we're clear, are you planning to allow any further public testimony at the?
Yes, we will reopen public
Okay.
testimony.
So we'll make sure when we do the noticing for that
Yes.
we include that so the public can, if anybody else wants to come and testify, that they can.
Absolutely. Okay. Next item on the agenda is to receive public testimony on code amendments to WMC 21.21.030. Can we have a motion to open that public hearing?
Yes, so I move that we open the public hearing on modification of WMC 21.21.030.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to open the public hearing with amendments to WMC 21.21.030. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Just so you know, that was done, they were having trouble capturing it on video, so they asked us to turn the light down a
Oh,
little
okay,
bit.
that's fine.
Yeah, sorry about that.
We really,
It's all about the lighting.
Yes.
And staff report?
Yeah, this will be pretty quick. This is not, this isn't a very big amendment. It's actually just kind of following up on stuff that's already been taking place over the last year or so with the Civic Campus project, which I think most of you are fairly familiar with. So again, we start out with this question, what are we doing? And so there's basically two things we're looking at making amendments on. One of them is this map designating streets for mandatory residential and retail development at the street level, which is in 21.21.030. and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then the other one is that we want to amend our commercial design standards in chapter 20.40 to allow for alternative design standards based on the Downtown Vision Illustrative Guide that the council had adopted through a resolution, although it's not actually a development standard or anything, but they've kind of adopted this as kind of a guide for what they want to have happen in the downtown. So why are we doing this? This, as I mentioned before, the city entered into an agreement with Woodinville Civic Campus Partner LLC for redevelopment of the Woodinville Civic Campus site. And so in order to kind of support this, the council's vision that they wanted for this project that was outlined in the agreement, there was some changes that the Civic Campus folks let us know that needed to be done in order to be able to realize that vision. So that's what these are kind of based on. And one of the important things to note, though, is that even though the Civic Campus project kind of promoted this, the fact that we're applying the Downtown Vision and Illustrative Guide as an alternative to the commercial design standards, those go beyond just the downtown. In fact, in the staff report, I identified the other zoning districts where those design standards are allowed. So it actually has a bigger ramification, but it's still overall, we actually think the impact will actually be pretty minor. So the first amendment we talked about, this is the map, this is in our code, it's in our pedestrian overlay, and essentially what it is that our regulations in the central business district don't allow residential on the ground floor except where there are exceptions allowed for. This is the exception. It's this map that basically outlines in blue is where residential would be required, in red is where retail is required, and then we have this other thing called market, which can decide between either retail or it can be residential, can be allowed. And so I highlighted up on the map here, the section here, this is the part here where the Civic Campus ends for the City Hall site, and you'll see here it's currently blank. So right now, no residential would be allowed adjacent to 133rd along this property. So what we wanted to propose to do is change the map so that we can allow markets, so it can be either residential or it can be retail. I think, were they looking to want to do the living workspaces here, or was it just
That was a discussion.
That was one of the discussions they had with it. I don't know if they'd yet decided on it, but they wanted to have the flexibility to be able to put residential along this site as they're finishing developing it. So that's what this amendment would essentially allow. Is currently no residential is allowed. This would make it potentially possible to allow for residential along 133rd and to be incorporated into some of the buildings that they have for this project. So I think that's all I really have to say on that. Any questions as far as this map amendment? It's pretty straightforward, I think.
Are you putting black or blue?
It'll be in black.
In black, okay, so both.
So yeah, so I don't know if that shows up in black on there,
Right,
but it's
Black.
yeah, it's in black.
Second question. The white means you can't have any, right?
Oh,
Would not allow residential would not be allowed there. That's
But
correct.
others are allowed.
What's that?
But others,
Non-residential would be allowed. Yes.
So what does it mean when the middle is nothing? That means you can't have residential? I mean, these are all residential there.
No,
on
you
the
could
right.
have residential interior, correct?
Yeah, so the way our code reads is residential is not allowed abutting a public street unless it's modified by this map.
Okay.
So it's always allowed in the
Okay.
interior, we're just talking about abutting streets.
And I think there's a certain distance on what they consider abutting.
Is that 300 feet?
No,
No, it's not the.
That's adjacency.
I
There
think-
you go.
Yeah, I think it's 30 feet.
Yeah,
So-
it actually tells you up there on the.
so the back of the residence could be towards the street? The back wall
If
of
it's
the
more than,
residence?
if it's more than, yes, if it's more, and if it's more than 30 feet, and there's a note up here that talks about, it says
Where's
where,
this
and I can't see it off the top of my head up here, but it talks about 30 feet deep, so,
Abutting.
yes, you could have the residential on the backside, you could also have it, it could even be visible from the street if it's far enough back and in the interior of the property.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about this other issue.
Discussion.
But
Yeah,
is this
What
30
are they
feet that's
trying
drawn here?
That's not the scale, so,
Okay,
don't-
because if it is, that 300 is a lot.
yeah, no, it's not the scale.
Except for allowed residential dwellings.
And I
Okay.
think there's actually a note up there that says it's not the scale.
I
So-
don't see the 30 feet.
Sorry, I'll wait. the black then means that market value will determine whether or not they put residences.
Not market value, just markets will determine whether
Market.
it can be either residential
value,
or it
right.
can be
Market demand.
So
residential.
I have a memory, and Steve, somebody may be able to correct me, but the big apartments that went in,
Wooden Creek.
Wooden
Wooden Creek, I have a memory that at some point we thought a lot of those were gonna be ground floor retail, and at some point that morphed to, oh, the market doesn't demand that, so you're not gonna
No,
get
it's
as
up
many,
there
is
on the
that
map.
right? Right,
So this is Wooden Creek.
yeah, I
All
think that, right,
Yeah,
all that
and
is
that must be
ground floor
retail.
retail.
right, I thought at some point they had kind of tried to maneuver that and say market demand was different, and that concerns me a little bit as far as
Who decides market?
who decides market.
There's not a lot of profit in commercial space with residential, that's probably why they try to do that.
Right.
But who
Yeah.
decides market? What is market?
So they
Developers.
propose it, but we
Developer.
ultimately evaluate it. Yeah, we'll ultimately evaluate it. But you're correct, that's the thing I'm hearing a lot of too, is that basically a lot of the commercial, a lot of the market is for residential, but that's why, going back to the previous discussion, why, preserving your commercial space can be very important. In this case, they actually have commercial and everything being incorporated. We're trying to create a mixed-use development in the Civic Campus Center, but it's an important thing to keep a note on.
Right, because it does seem like some of the corner, the north corner, at some point was going to be a brewery and whatever the new schoolhouse is. So if we take that market, then they start putting residences in there. So it feels like,
Well, they could go either way.
yeah, there was a swaying of, won't this be beautiful? This is what we want. And now we're going to change it to, maybe not.
Yeah.
So,
That's bothering me a little bit as far as
Well, there's
what
another
we
component
saw.
on this, because of the Civic Campus project.
Right.
That development agreement actually lays out it lays out in general, and the council is open to allowing for residential.
Okay.
But they've already actually laid out pretty much what the schoolhouse
Right.
and spaces can be kind of used for. That was all part of the development agreement.
Okay. So then why do we need this?
Because the development agreement cannot go contrary to our zoning regulations. So unless our zoning regulations allow for residential to happen along that stretch, the
Okay.
development agreement cannot alter that.
Okay.
And should we say that they should not face the streets, that the entrances should not face the streets, no matter what? Or what?
no, they can in this
In this scenario.
where we're modifying the map to allow it.
Why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you force them to have the entrance on the
Well,
opposite side?
currently, the decisions made before us here already currently allow for residential to be on the streets and some of these things and facing towards the street. It's already, so this is just basically taking what's already been passed policies, and we're just basically expanding to allow the market
That's
along this
fine.
particular area.
So-
Wooden Creek.
Basically, what we're doing is where Wooden Creek is down there along, we're just extending that up, so it's gonna be a continuation.
Exactly.
You already have along there, yeah, which,
I find entrances to the street side
And
romantic.
everything Wooden Creek's consistent with that.
yeah, which is kinda nice. I mean, you have people coming out their front door and
Yes.
getting, neighbors here walking down the street, oh, hi, Joe, how are you? Oh, you got a new dog, kind of thing. So, I like that. Have we talked about, though, if they do it along 133rd, like Wooden Creek has, that you have to have a stoop or a porch or something that it,
That's the design
It's
standard.
design.
is that in the design standards?
I don't think that's actually in the design standards,
Okay.
so.
Well, I think that's really important, so if it's not in here, at least I would like to see it in the development
I
agreement.
know it was mentioned in the presentation. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
part of the agreement, but it should probably be something like that.
But again, we always know that,
Yeah.
well, this is kind of what we want to do, and we get that picture in our mind, and then something else comes along. But I think it's really
Good point.
important to have that delineation between,
Yeah, but just know the development agreement for the Civic Campus is actually already done.
Right.
So,
Okay.
yeah, they're actually now in the process of getting permits and everything, and this is actually part of their permitting process.
got it.
Because we can't do the land use approval because they want to put residential along 133rd, unless this goes through, then there's kind of a holdup on their permitting.
Okay, thank you.
In the case of Wooden Creek Village, was a stoop or porch or whatever required for the first floor or close to the street like it is in 133rd?
If it's not in our design standards, then there wouldn't be a requirement for that.
Was
And it doesn't mean
required?
that you couldn't potentially have something like that in the designs, because that's the thing about the development agreement, you have a lot of flexibility. So, I mean, those are some things when you get to Wooden Village, if it's something that planning commission wants to take some of the design stuff into consideration that doesn't run contrary to our code, that is certainly something that can be brought up during those development agreement discussions.
Does
Well,
that
I guess my question is, they have the porches or stoops there with Wooden Creek Village. So my question is, was that required as part of the DA? Was it part of the design standards there?
Wooden
or
Creek Village.
Yeah.
is it part of the zoning requirement?
I don't believe it's part of the zoning requirement. It's not in the development agreement. I don't know, it might have just been what they wanted and what they suggested, and it worked with our design guidelines. Or it may have been some sort of negotiation where maybe, even though it's not written down, maybe they heard that and went with it. I've never seen that written down anywhere, though, that it was required.
Well, I remember we had a conversation about it, and so maybe that was just kind of a, like you said, a you know, yeah, that looks good, and they said
The
they wanted
design
it.
committee reviewed it. But
Yeah.
we met as a group and reviewed all that, so it's
Yeah. Fortunately, it was a while ago.
Yeah.
quite a while ago.
Not many people are still around when that went in.
No.
Not at least in staff, right? All right, so that's the map change being recommended. And then the other part here, I already talked a little bit about allowing departures from the commercial design standards in Chapter 2040 based on the Downtown Vision Illustrative Guide approved under Resolution number 524. So one of the key things on this is that you have to still have a development agreement authorizing the use of the illustrative guide. So it's not just going to be anybody coming in wanting to suddenly use it. They would actually need to go through a development agreement so that the council would be giving them authority to be able to use it. And then the other thing what we needed out of this is that they have to make sure that they identify the departures that they want during the design review, because one of the things that can be a struggle if you don't highlight it with us, it's hard to know then what is what between the two, because our commercial design standards are quite long and the illustrative guidelines are actually quite long as well. So they have to identify those specifically for us so that we know what the departures are. So it can bring some clarity for us. And so on that one, that's really all I have. Staff recommends approval of this, of the proposed, of the Planning Commission's recommendation.
So absent any language to the contrary, they could have entrances straight off the street or the sidewalk with no porch, no stoop, no foyer, whatever. Is that correct?
Well, they're going to need to have something that people can get in and out. I mean, there's just a thing in designing the house, because you can't put your steps into the public right-of-way. So if you need steps to get out of the building, then certainly you're going to have something created for that. It just depends on where they would set that ground floor elevation of the building. It would determine whether they would need to have it absolutely, or whether it would be an optional thing for them.
If I'm not mistaken, they're going to be building a large garage below it, so I would assume it'd be raised up at least.
They are going to be building a garage below, correct, yes.
Not a lot of space between the street level and how far they can go.
Yeah, you know, I understand,
Yeah.
but I always think about unintended consequences.
Right.
And this, we're dealing with zoning, which is not an individual project. And it could be interpreted or be precedential to another development in another situation. And we might wind up with something we said we never intended to see that happen.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about stoops is really you're talking about design standards, because that's really where it comes into play, is in the design standards. Now, the illustrative guidelines, I don't know if they say anything about it or not, because we really haven't gotten ourselves totally familiar, because we haven't applied it much, and we'd have to double check. But that whole stoop thing is really something that's part of a design standard piece, which we are going to be taking a look at our design standards as a whole because of this illustrative guide. We've got to figure out how to incorporate. So we are going to have a chance, whether, I don't know if the stuff that you've gotten currently on the Civic Campus project, anything in there, if you can recall what they were looking to do along 133rd?
I don't remember seeing stoops. I think they're gonna have like from my memory. And I tried to pull it up, and then I remembered we're not at City Hall. My memory is that they are proposing one kind of central entrance to the units. That being said, we do have different design standards that will probably require them to do some different transparencies and things along that frontage, but yeah.
So there won't be individual, from what you recall, there won't be individual entrances to the units along 133rd?
That's what I remember.
Okay.
But I'm not 100% sure on that.
I have a question. When we're looking at the, after the resolution, the text for it, I don't see anything underlined or striked out, where it says, new text is shown by an underline, and
You're talking about the, you're talking about on the Planning Commission's recommendation?
I think he's talking this code.
I'm on page 4
Yeah.
and 5 and 6.
Yeah,
So it's just the map is the part that's being changed?
No, so, yeah, you actually have to, this is how ordinances are set up. So if you go to page 6, right, of the Planning Commission recommendation, and it says Section 2, adopt WMC 21.40.035. That's a new section being adopted. You're not amending a section, it's a new section.
Okay, so we're not deleting anything or adding, changing, and then, okay, it's a whole new section. Thank you.
Exactly.
Because the only reason I was asking about that and reading through that is because in the analysis on number 4, west of 100, retail is mandatory south of City Hall. That doesn't sound quite right.
Did I say that?
Yeah. So I was just, but
Yeah.
that's nowhere in the,
That's reading the blue as a red.
so.
Being colorblind.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Good.
Yeah, you're right, you're correct, because along the street there, the map clearly indicates that it would be residential.
Residential for sure.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we now have a chance for the public to make comment on this. Anybody in the audience want to make a comment? All right. With that, can we have a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close the public hearing.
And a second?
Second?
We have a motion from Commissioner Omeron and a second from Commissioner Yarbrough to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. The public hearing is closed. Would you like to recommend that we forward this on to council?
Okay.
Okay. So agreeable up here we are.
I move that the Planning Commission approve a recommendation relating to amend Section 21.21.030 of the Woodinville Municipal Code pertaining to the map designating streets for mandatory residential and retail development at street level in the pedestrian core district, design district, and to amend the commercial design standards in Chapter 20.40 Woodinville Municipal Code to allow the downtown vision and illustrative guide approved under resolution number 524 as alternative commercial design standards.
Second?
Sure.
Okay.
That's good.
We have a motion from Commissioner Yarbrough, a second from Commissioner Montague that the Planning Commission approve a recommendation relating to amend Section 21.21.030 of the Woodinville Municipal Code pertaining to the map designating streets for mandatory residential and retail development at street level in the pedestrian core design district, and to amend the commercial design standards in Chapter 20.40 of the Woodinville Municipal Code to allow the downtown vision and illustrative guide approved under resolution number 524 as an alternative commercial design standard.
It's a mouthful.
It is.
What was that motion?
I think there's more in the motion than there is actually
I
in the
think
ordinance.
so too. I tend to agree. Any further discussion on that? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. You have a recommendation. We now are at our second opportunity for public comments. No? Okay. Director's report.
I'm trying to think if I have too much. I don't have too much to say for you tonight. One thing I'll note, I don't remember if at the last meeting, if we had Emily join us yet?
No, I
No,
don't
we had
believe
not.
so.
Yeah, so we have a new planner that just joined our staff last week, right? 2 weeks.
2 weeks ago.
Boy, time
Right
flies
before,
fast.
or the Monday before Halloween.
Yeah, so we're currently fully staffed again right now, although, you know, they're in the training mode because there's a lot of things coming at them. But just if you get a chance and you're down at City Hall, come by, say hi. It'd be actually a great opportunity if she gets a chance to meet you. At some point, same thing with Kelsey, who's the other one that came a few months ago. I'm hoping to have them come to the Planning Commission. Right now, though, everything's focused in just getting settled in, so it'll probably be a little while, but at some point I do want to give them a chance to come meet you guys and actually maybe make some presentations to you as well. I also wanted to note from the council, I'm trying to think here, make sure I'm thinking right. The comp plan amendment, I think I talked to you guys about this previously as well. You know, the 2017 comp plan amendments involving the school impact fees. Those are going to go for second reading at the council's December meeting. Also, I'm trying to think what was the other thing we had. There's also, just so you know, this doesn't involve you, but we're also amending also the school impact fee ordinance. That's another thing that's going in front. Those aren't development regulations, so they don't necessarily impact you, but just give you an idea of some of the things that we've got going on in terms of what we call long-range stuff. As far as that, I don't think I can think of anything else other than things are still keeping pretty busy. And
I would anticipate, if I could just add, that we'll probably do a design review committee meeting. January is what I'm thinking, to look at the Civic Campus project, so you'll have your opportunity to see that then.
is that the only one we have, or is there also another project potentially coming up on that as well for design review?
I mean, there's several other projects that will need to go to design review. When they'll be ready, it's harder for me to say.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of things going on that'll be coming before you.
And the design review committee is currently Commissioner Yarbrough, Honorad, and Young, is that correct?
Can other people attend? Is it open to the public?
Well, once you get to a quorum, we have to notice it.
We have to notice it, but, so
No.
if you,
That's the short answer.
That was very nice of them.
It's a quorum.
but in his
Yes, with
question, are
extra
those
effort,
open to the
right?
public?
I don't think we
I don't think
advertise
they-
them,
yeah.
but I also don't think we've excluded people who wanted to
Right.
come.
Yeah, and I would note, I mean, if there was a desire for more planning commission members to be part of that, I mean, we can always do an advertisement for a special meeting.
Especially.
If there was a desire by the planning commission that a few more members wanted, I don't think we necessarily have a concern with that, as long as, you know.
I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I'm
No,
just-
It's not fair, it's a great question, because I kind of was like, oh, I'd like to come, and I'm like, no, I can't. But one of the things that,
Oh, you can.
well, I think, is that we talked about this, I think, when Commissioner Young was appointed to it, and it's been a while since there's been a design
We
review
haven't had
committee.
one since
Yeah.
the construction office.
That the design review committee report back to the planning commission on that meeting
Okay.
and that, so.
Would it be, I mean, I'm not talking for myself, but I'm sure we could open it up to the public.
Yeah.
If we have as many people that show up here, I mean, it won't like bust the room. And if anybody wants to show up and look, I mean, it wouldn't be bad, and people would be more aware of the design and how it will look.
It's currently held in a little meeting room,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a secret
with
room.
a round
in the basement.
table, yeah, so.
Right.
it's-
But if
you
we
have to
ended
build
up
it up,
actually
yes.
going to a special meeting, we would be back into the
Yeah,
chamber
in
again.
chambers.
Up to the chamber. It has to be recorded and everything
It
else.
doesn't have to be recorded, that's actually not a requirement.
No.
Minutes do have to be taken for special meetings, but the only official record actually is the written minutes that you actually approve.
You
The
have to
recording
put
is
it in the
something we
newspaper
do
ahead of
as a
time,
courtesy
like
for,
But
The
are
public?
those meetings, are they publicized that they're going to happen?
No.
no, not typically.
So clarification, point of clarification, the opens meeting regulation is about the planning commission and the city council, not about the design.
Correct.
Correct. And if, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, if 4 city councilors or 4 commissioners show up at something that has nothing to do with the city council or the planning commission, they're not discussing anything that relates to city council and the planning commission or are not making any decision relative, that
No,
doesn't.
we won't go down that route.
No.
If there is a quorum, it will be
I'm
noticed
sorry,
as a special
I'm asking
meeting.
the question. Please answer the question, not your interpretation of what I'm trying to get
Well-
at. What I'm getting at is that the purpose of the open commission, I would find it ironic that we do not publicize a meeting held in the meeting, a room that no one knows about, such that we enforce open meeting regulation. That seems insane. It's Kafkaesque. We are trying to get people to participate. So if it's the cost of us is publishing something in the paper or putting online that there'll be a meeting open to the public, I think it's worth it. Even if no one shows up, at least we tell to our citizens, yes, we want you to come and learn about that.
So there's one of the things you have to know, that there's a distinction between what are quasi-judicial decisions and what are ministerial decisions, basically things that involve staff and project permitting that have due process and stuff like that, versus something that is a legislative item. They're very different things. So our ordinances do not require the public to be notified about a design review. So that's not actually the intent in a design review. It's not intended to necessarily, doesn't mean the public couldn't be invited to come in, but the ordinance does not intend for that to be a public process. And because of due process and things like that, it's not set up to be noticed. But if we had a quorum of the planning commission members there, because we don't want to run afoul of the Open Meetings Act, we would, whether we could or couldn't do it without notifying it, we would hold it as a special meeting regardless, because that just keeps us safe with the Open Meetings Act, and then certainly the public could come to it. But you got to keep in mind that design review is not a legislative action. It is a project permitting. It's a quasi-judicial action.
I think there's a certain frankness and a conversation that we have during those meetings that would not be good to open to the public. I don't think, I mean, it's all preliminary stuff that we're discussing, and some of it's off the wall, and I don't know that it would be a good area for the public to join necessarily.
So just our bylaws for committees, the planning commission may establish from time to time such standing or special committees as it deems advisable and assign each committee specific duties or functions. So I assume this is at some point that a design review committee was established. Each standing committee shall consist of a maximum of 3 members, and minutes are not required. No standing or special committee shall have the power to commit the planning commission to the endorsement of any plan or program without its submission to and the consensus of the body of the commission.
Yeah.
So I kind of tend to agree with him. I mean, because we don't have any role in the design review, so it doesn't come back to us for approval or anything. So I think it's more a consultation with staff than anything.
Okay.
So.
And we do end up having larger design reviews, right? We've reviewed this property and the public has seen pictures of it. So we do offer them the opportunity to look and voice concerns and stuff. I think there's a delineation someplace between the design review and a public.
Our code, basically when it comes to project permit applications, our codes identify when we want to take in public comments and stuff. But even within that, public comments on a project permit is not the same as a legislative action. It's treated very differently. And we can get into more of those conversations. One of the things that we want to next year start maybe being able to offer to you guys a little bit more, some chances for training and to learn a little bit more broadly some of the other things and functions and stuff that actually go on, so you guys can kind of get a better feel for, because there's a lot of complexities in the land use world, and although you don't have to deal with a lot of the permitting stuff, it is helpful to understand it. I always think it's helpful for planning commissions to have kind of a knowledge of it, because when you're doing your legislative recommendations to the council and stuff, having an understanding of how some of that fits into the permitting world can be very, very helpful in informing future decisions and stuff. So we're going to try to look into some of that next year about opportunities for maybe bringing folks in here that can maybe offer some training and offering, you know, some, and then it can also kind of break up some of the, so you're not always having to look at development regulations. You can kind of just go into some other areas and sit back and relax and kind of just enjoy some of the things. So those are some things that we're hoping to bring to you next year that we'll start actually looking into as well.
Excellent. Anything else in the director's report?
That's all I got.
That's all you got? All right. Reports of commissioners and issues to be forwarded to the city council. Commissioner King.
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Mesa.
Oh, nothing for me.
Nothing at this time. I wondered if there's any advancement of the Arabian horse farm development. Has there been anything happening?
Do you know that something was submitted for the site?
Well, heard there was a proposal. That's
Okay.
all
That's why I was trying to figure out where we were at.
What you
Yes.
wanted
You're
to
asking
know.
me.
What you wanted to know.
Yes, so
Well,
yes.
where's it at?
The townhome project for that site did submit a land use application, critical areas alteration, and SEPA permit. I think that's all, hoping I remembered them all. I think that it is, just going off memory again, so I could be wrong, but I think it's about 93 or 94 units total on that site.
No permits have been issued?
Nope. In fact, the notices have not gone out yet because we received the application, they were missing a few things, so we sent them a letter incomplete. We're just waiting on them to resubmit before we send out the
There's
notices.
no public information on this at all yet?
Correct. It is public information because they submitted, but there's nothing out there yet because they don't have a complete application.
Okay.
We haven't done a noticing on it because we're not there yet in
Yeah,
the
all right. It's
process.
R4 and they're complying with the zoning requirements of R4.
You know, they've just submitted, we haven't done that analysis yet.
All right.
But they will. I mean, it won't get approved unless they do.
Yeah,
All right.
I
So-
did see though it listed in the permit submitted.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
it
in
is on
there.
page
Yeah.
3 of 5.
I can't remember what page it's
I-
on.
I looked
Did
Three
you
of
find-
5.
page
Says, like, Kinderman 94 unit, SEPA application, site development, shown for all, Woodinville Townhouse, 132nd Avenue, would that be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That
I
would
don't know
be
which section, but the 3 of 5.
You know, so- Yeah, oh, Woodinville Townhomes, yep.
Yeah, for 1019, for the 11019, page 3 of 5.
Keep going. Commissioner Young, you have anything?
Our signs still don't welcome people to Woodinville.
Woodinville Townhomes.
Oh, yeah.
What did you say?
Our signs still don't welcome people in Woodinville.
Is that your report?
Yeah, sure.
Good.
And Commissioner Mesa asked to have the floor back.
Yes. As part of my diversity and inclusion work, and because we are in the middle of doing a lot of projects in Woodinville, I would like to ask the City Council to consider looking at policies that promote diversity and inclusion. One specific policy that I have talked to some of the members in the City Council about is having family parking spots throughout the city, especially in the places where they make sense. For example, at the grocery stores or places of commerce that families might attend. The idea is basically the idea is to provide spaces that can be situated right next to current handicap parking spots that have access to ramps and such, and that are close to the entrances, so that families with young children can make use of those ramps if you have strollers or other things like that, and that you don't have to be walking, really large distances to get to the entrances with really young children through a busy parking lot. So I just wanted to bring that up, if we can start including some of these things in our policies or in our discussions, or if we can add it to our docket, that would be great.
So that's, I don't know if that's a development regulation or not, but it's certainly something if the planning commission wants to take a look at it and have as a topic of discussion, can certainly be added to your docket for discussion. And if you don't, you're also, as a citizen independent of the planning commission, you're also always welcome to, as long as you're not representing yourself as representing the planning commission, you're always welcome to also, contact your elected officials, the city council, on any of these suggestions as well. But if you're wanting to kind of pull the planning commission into that, then I think that's something that, if you want us to schedule something in a future meeting on it for a conversation, we certainly are happy to do that. You just let us know if you want to do that.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing I have is I want to thank Woodinville Fire and Rescue for making this room available to us tonight and again on December 5th. It's greatly appreciated that we were able to use this. And with that, there being no further business before the Planning Commission, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.